So whilst listening to this, just bear in mind that the FDLR, which is a rebel group in the eastern part of Congo that derives from Rwanda, and the M23, which is a Rwandan-backed group, which is the Tutsi side, and FDLR is the Hutu side, are both fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, FDLR...
I'll ask the Minister and the Secretary of State. Minister, the alleged linked UN group of experts report indicated that the DRC army was supplying arms to FDLR. And it also indicated that the FDLR commander under that arrangement ordered the shelling of Rwandan territory in May. Now, this happens at a time when Rwanda is under pressure that it is allegedly supporting M23. What is your take on that, and how can Rwandans be assured of their security? Mr. Secretary, now given the fact that FDLR gets support from the Congolese army, how does the US expect Rwanda to protect its borders against any attacks that happened, like the one happened in May? And also, at the same time, you cannot talk about FDLR without talking about the genocide. They are responsible for the genocide. Today, the United States remains the only country in the world that has deliberately refused to adopt the official definition of the genocide, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Now, what's the logic behind this deliberate stubbornness of the US not adopting the genocide? Yet, as you said, you stand by Rwanda. Thank you.
There are very credible reports of support for armed groups by all sides, including the FDLR, by Congolese forces, and M23, by Rwandans. And our position is clear. Whoever it's by, whoever it's to, that support needs to cease for any armed group. When it comes to the FDLR, it has sought to conduct attacks on Rwanda, and it's supported hateful ideologies. And we've seen support, as I said, we've seen reports of cooperation between Congolese forces and the FDLR. I raised this directly with the president in the Congo, and we are pressing again for that support to cease, just as we're pressing for any support to M23 to cease. These groups need to end the violence, demobilize, and pursue talks with the government. And as I noted, both leaders here in Rwanda and in the Congo made clear to me that they're prepared to engage in talks with the various armed factions as necessary in order to pursue their demobilization in the context of the process led by President Kenyatta and others, the Nairobi process. We'll continue to support that. And when it comes to recognition of the genocide and the horrors committed, we've been very clear about that. I'll have an opportunity to visit the memorial in just a few hours, and to continuously take account of the almost unfathomable suffering of so many people that remains present in people's lives. And we'll continue to work at the United Nations for every appropriate recognition of history, even as we do everything possible every single day to make sure that history is never repeated. Thank you.
You mentioned your conversations with both the president of Rwanda and of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in Congo, you heard many complaints about the violence in eastern Congo and the support of Rwanda supposedly for some of the armed groups to the extent that they demanded sanctions be imposed. against Rwanda, and yet here you probably heard a certain amount of popular support for the M23 group. So how do you reconcile those two very disparate positions in your quest for negotiations as you described? Did you specifically ask President Kagame to end the support for M23? And then finally, do you now put the M23 and the FDLR on the same ground? It seems like you're almost making an equivalence, equivalency between the two. So I'm interested about that. And then, Mr. Minister, the U.S. government is asking you to end support for M23. How do you respond to that? Thanks.
Thank you. So it's a matter of principle that applies equally. This is not a question of weighing one group against another. There's a basic principle that there should not be support coming from governments or coming from their entities like their armed forces for arming groups like non-state groups like M23 or like FDLR. And that's a basic principle because to the extent that that happens, that's likely to perpetuate conflict and violence, not end it. Doesn't suggest one way or another equivalence between groups or some valuation, but the basic principle is very important, and it's very important here. And yes, I specifically raised that with President Kagame, just as I raised it with President Tshisekedi in the DRC. We also raised another principle, which is the territorial integrity of states and the need to protect that. And we also raised another principle, which is that leaders have a responsibility to speak out against hate speech, something that we've seen, unfortunately, increasingly in recent months with regard to the Congo, in particular, directed at certain communities, including Rwandaphones, and directed at the UN and its mission there. So this was something that I raised in both meetings with both leaders, and the question, of course, is now turning principle into practice, and that's what we talked about. And the best way to do that, in our judgment, is to pursue the African-led mediation efforts through the Nairobi process. President Kenyatta has now been designated by the East African community to carry on that mission, even when he is no longer in office as President of Kenya. President Lorenzo from Angola is also very engaged. And what we heard from both presidents is their appreciation for our own efforts, the United States efforts, to support that African-led mediation effort. We'll continue to do that, just as we've been doing in the months leading up to this visit.
Whatever government of Rwanda could do in DRC or in our region will be about protecting our people and protecting the territorial integrity of our country and its sovereignty. It is not about supporting M23. And if we want a lasting solution for the problems in Eastern DRC in our region, we just need to deal with the root causes of the problem, which is the presence and the preservation of the FDLR in Eastern DRC and their collaboration with FRDC. Let me remind you that they have, together, jointly, they have shelled the Rwandan territory 3 times. On 19th March, on 23rd May, and on 10th June. And we have always warned the government of DRC, we have asked them to stop those attacks. And if we need really a lasting solution, we should go to the root causes of the problems, which is the genocide ideology being spread in our region from the genocide which took place here in 1994. And the preservation of the FDLR, which is a genocidal force. And there are mechanisms in place. There are regional mechanisms which were agreed on by the African Union, by the East African Community, by the ICJR, and we just need to go to those mechanisms, be serious with them, and implement them. And we find solutions to the existing political issues in the DRC, and eventually we achieve peace for all of us. Eastern DRC needs peace, but we also need peace for us to develop our.
Isabel Masozera from RBA. I have a question for both officials. Secretary Blinken. The State Department has designated Paul Rusesabagina as wrongfully detained. What does this mean in this case? Also, we understand that you are unable to meet the victims of FLN attacks due to the tight schedule, but what would you say to the victims and their families? And also to Minister Biruta on the same issue. President Paul Kagame last night tweeted saying there are things that just don't work here. Was this discussed this morning in the meeting, and what does the government plan to do on this issue of putting pressure on releasing Rusesabagina?
Thank you very much. We have been clear about our concerns related to Paul Rusesabagina's trial and conviction, particularly the lack of fair trial guarantees. We continue to urge the government to address concerns about the legal protections afforded to him in this case and establish safeguards to prevent similar outcomes in the future. I had an opportunity to discuss this matter with President Kagame this morning. I'm not going to get into specifics, but we'll continue to engage on it. And I also had an opportunity just a few days ago to talk to Paul Rusesabagina's family, and we'll continue to be in contact with them as well. Thank you. Oh, and I'm sorry, the second part of your question. One of the most profound reasons that we are engaged in support of African-led mediation efforts in the Eastern Congo, as well as in other parts of the region, is precisely because at the heart of everything is human suffering and real people, individuals, men, women, and children, who are the victims of conflict, the victims of violence, the victim of armed groups of one kind or another. And it's very easy to get focused on big questions of policy, but what this comes down to is actual lives, real human lives. That's what motivates me. That's what motivates us to seek to help wherever we can, resolve conflict, preserve peace, and give people a chance. And I think we've seen far too many victims of violence and conflict, and that's why we have a strong incentive to do whatever we can to end it. I have opportunities wherever possible to meet with those who've been victimized by violence of one kind or another, who've been victimized by conflict, who've been victimized by a lack of opportunity that results from places and societies being in conflict. And if I don't have an opportunity to meet with an individual group, I usually have a pretty good idea of their stories, what's happened to them. And that is a motivating factor for me every single day.
On the question about Rusesabagina, as far as the government of Rwanda is concerned, Paul Rusesabagina is a Rwandan citizen, and he was arrested, he was tried, and convicted, along with 20 other accomplices for serious crimes they committed against Rwandan citizens, and which he committed while residing in the United States. And this was done lawfully under both Rwandan and international laws. Therefore, Rwanda will continue to abide by our laws and the decisions made by our judiciary. And we will request our partners to respect Rwanda's sovereignty, Rwanda's laws, and its institutions, That's what I can say.
Secretary Blinken, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, there have been reports of regarding harassment and arrest of domestic dissidents by the Rwandan government, along with reports of transnational repression, including the use of spyware and alleged attacks against opponents in South Africa and Mozambique and elsewhere. Some members of the U.S. Congress are calling on the Biden administration to withhold foreign assistance and employ the Khashoggi ban. At the same time, these messages have been made before by U.S. officials. Did you hear anything today that indicates there will be a change in these actions? And going back to Paul Rusesabagina, now deemed as wrongfully detained, based on what I heard from the foreign minister, it doesn't seem like the Rwandan government is prepared to release him. How do you believe this can be resolved? And do you believe this issue, along with the others I mentioned, will pose a threat to the two countries' ability to work together smoothly? And for you, Mr. Minister, what is your response to the allegations of domestic and transnational repression and to U.S. Advocacy on these points? And how do you see the U.S. response to your government statements about Paul Rusesabagina's alleged actions? Thank you.
Missy, thanks very much. First, let me start by saying this. We recognize Rwanda's incredibly difficult history, the 1994 genocide. And we know the ongoing legacy of that history and the genocide. But criminalization of some individuals' participation in politics, harassment of those who express opposition to the current government, we believe undermine future peace, stability, and success. Success which has already been extraordinary in the case of Rwanda over the last 20 plus years, but which will not reach its full potential if those who express disagreements, criticism of whatever the government happens to be, are repressed in their ability to do that, whether that is here in Rwanda or abroad. And to that point, as you noted, we established what is called the Khashoggi ban to make clear that any country that engages in repressive actions against those who criticize it, if those persons are in the United States, may face consequences from those actions. I've shared all of this with President Kagame today. It's not for me to characterize his response, but these are concerns that I shared, and I did that again in the context of making clear our desire for an even stronger, even more productive relationship between the United States and Rwanda, building on what Rwanda has done so successfully, building on what we've already done together. But these are issues that we care deeply about, our Congress cares deeply about, the American people care deeply about. I also shared with President Kagame that in many ways our own focus and motivation on these issues goes back to our very founding. It's maybe a little bit particular in some ways to the United States, but it's in our DNA. As you've heard President Biden discuss, we came together as a country, not around any particular group, any particular race, religion, ethnicity. We came together around an idea, a shared idea, that all are created equal and that all are entitled to the same basic inalienable rights. And of course, we've never made fully good on that ideal. We're in constant search of it, constant efforts to form our own more perfect union, which is an acknowledgement that we're not perfect, and this is a constant ongoing effort. But we do it openly, we do it transparently, we deal with our challenges, as I think the world can see. And so, by way of explanation as well, why we care so deeply about what we believe to be universal rights, not simply those that pertain to Americans. And again, on the matter in the case of Paul Rusesabagina, what I can share with you today is that I raised this with President Kagame. We had a discussion about it. I'm not going to, again, characterize that. We'll continue to engage, and I'll also follow up.
An armed group calling itself M23 has been advancing to Goma in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Its rebels have been fighting the Congolese army for about 2 months. UN experts say they have evidence Rwanda is backing the rebels. The Rwandan government has denied this. Hundreds of people in some areas have fled from their homes in recent days.
We were displaced after M23 captured our village. We are afraid of them. When they are fighting, they do not differentiate between soldiers and civilians. We do not want to die here.
This latest conflict is just one of many in the east of the country. So when the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Kinshasa, security matters dominated the talks.
We are very concerned by credible reports that Rwanda has provided support to M23. We call on all parties in the region to stop any support or cooperation with M23.
He's also